listened to it on the radio. That was the moment he made a decision that would change both their lives. "You're going," he told her, "and I'll make sure they listen." From that day forward, everything moved faster than she could process. Phone calls she never expected, meetings she didn't understand, record label conversations she wasn't prepared for, and at the center of all of it, him. He wasn't just recommending her. He was guiding every step, introducing her, defending her, writing for her. That's when the whispers began. Why her? Why was he investing this much time in a complete unknown? Why was he personally writing songs for her, instead of keeping them for himself? Nashville never believed in coincidences. By the time Connie entered the studio to record the song that would soon become historic, the tension was already there. People weren't just watching a new singer. They were watching the connection. She recorded "Once a Day." When the final note faded, the room went silent. Not polite silence, not uncertainty. The kind of silence that means something just happened. Bill Anderson didn't say much, he just smiled. The smile of someone who already knew the outcome, because that day didn't only launch a career. It created a question that would follow them for decades. Success changes schedules. Fame changes behavior. But suspicion changes how people watch you. By the time Connie Smith became one of the most requested voices in country music, the industry had already decided there was a story behind the story. They just didn't have proof. And proof is everything in Nashville. They toured constantly, same shows, same cities, same dressing room hallways. Night after night, their timing matched too perfectly to be coincidence. If she arrived late, he arrived minutes later. If interviews ran long, they both left together. No scandal ever surfaced. No photograph crossed a line. Nothing concrete. But the consistency kept feeding the narrative. Band members noticed how he adjusted keys to protect her voice before she. Radio hosts pushed harder. Magazine writers asked indirect questions. They never accused, but they circled closer each time. Then came the moment that nearly exposed everything. During a television appearance, the host unexpectedly asked if she would have had a career without Bill Anderson. The audience laughed lightly. It sounded like praise. Connie didn't laugh. She looked at him. Not quickly, not casually. A long glance, searching, almost uncertain. Like the answer wasn't simple. Seconds passed on live television. Bill answered before she did, joking that talent always finds its way. The crowd clapped. The band played a short transition chord. But viewers at home noticed her expression hadn't changed. After the show, rumors exploded backstage. Some thought the hesitation meant gratitude. Others thought it meant dependence. A few thought it meant something far more personal. Something neither of them wanted spoken aloud. From that night forward, interview questions became sharper, but so did their control. They scheduled fewer joint appearances. Conversations became shorter. Answers became cleaner, yet paradoxically. Distance only intensified the curiosity. Because if there was nothing unusual, why avoid the subject? Years passed. New artists arrived. New hits replaced old ones. But the question never faded. It followed every anniversary article, every retrospective, every documentary clip. People didn't just remember the songs. They remembered the connection. Success changes schedules. Fame changes behavior. But suspicion changes how people watch you. By the time Connie Smith became one of the most requested voices in country music, the industry had already decided there was a story behind the story. They just didn't have proof. And proof is everything in Nashville. They toured constantly. Same shows. Same cities. Night after night, their timing matched too perfectly to be coincidence. If she arrived late, he arrived minutes later. If interviews ran long, they both left together. No scandal ever surfaced. No photograph crossed a line. Nothing concrete. But the consistency kept feeding the narrative. Band members noticed how he adjusted keys to protect her voice before shows. Producers noticed he refused to let anyone else produce certain sessions. Even stage crews started placing their dressing rooms near each other because, as one technician joked, they end up there anyway. Still, publicly, they remained formal. He called her Miss Connie. She called him Bill. Always polite, always composed. Yet the distance somehow felt rehearsed. The pressure increased when other songwriters quietly complained that Anderson was giving his strongest material to one artist only, in a business where hits were currency. That wasn't generosity. That was loyalty, demanded explanation. Radio hosts pushed harder. Magazine writers asked indirect questions. They never accused, but they circled closer each time. Then came the moment that nearly exposed everything. During a television appearance, the host unexpectedly asked if she would have had a career without Bill Anderson. The audience laughed lightly. It sounded like praise. Connie didn't laugh. She looked at him. Not quickly. Not casually. A long glance, searching, almost uncertain. Like the answer wasn't simple. Seconds passed on live television. Bill answered before she did, joking that talent always finds its way. The crowd clapped. The band played a short transition chord. But viewers at home noticed her expression hadn't changed. After the show, rumors exploded backstage. Some thought the hesitation meant gratitude. Others thought it meant dependence. A few thought it meant something far more personal, something neither of them wanted spoken aloud. From that night forward, interview questions became sharper. But so did their control. They scheduled fewer joint appearances. Conversations became shorter. Answers became cleaner. Yet paradoxically, distance only intensified the curiosity. Because if there was nothing unusual, why avoid the subject years past? New artists arrived. New hits replaced old ones. But the question never faded. It followed every anniversary article, every retrospective, every documentary clip. People didn't just remember the songs. They remembered the connection. And the strangest part was this. Neither of them ever publicly corrected the rumors. Not once. Not even. Time usually dissolves rumors. Careers rise, fade, and get replaced by new headlines. Nashville forgets quickly, unless a mystery survives long enough to become part of its history. And theirs did. Decades passed. The charts changed. Radio changed. Entire generations of artists came and went. But whenever Connie Smith's name appeared in an interview, one topic always returned. Bill Anderson. Not her awards, not her records. Him by then. They weren't touring constantly anymore. Their lives had moved in different directions. Publicly, they were simply respected legends who occasionally crossed paths at events honoring the past. Yet every time cameras caught them together, the same atmosphere resurfaced. Comfortable. Familiar. Not distant enough to be casual. Not close enough to explain. Journalists noticed the details. He still watched her before speaking, as if measuring his words around her presence. She still listened to his stories with the same quiet expression she had decades earlier. The industry had changed, but their dynamic hadn't. Then came the interviews late in life, the ones that reignited everything. Older artists tend to become more direct. Careers are complete. Reputations are secure. People finally say what they once avoided. But Connie didn't reveal a confession. She revealed something stranger. She described him as the person who understood her voice better than she did. The one who knew what she would feel in a song before she sang it. The one who could predict her reactions before she spoke. Not romance, not business. Something in between, something harder to define. And that only made people listen closer, because she also admitted there were conversations they never had publicly. Not arguments, not secrets exactly, just things they chose to leave unspoken. She said some relationships don't survive explanation, and once labeled, they lose what made them important. For the first time, it sounded less like avoidance and more like protection. Meanwhile, Bill, in separate interviews, echoed a similar tone. He never claimed ownership of her success. Instead, he described her as a voice he felt responsible for guiding, as if discovering it created a lifelong obligation he never stepped away from. 2 separate interviews. Same language, same restraint, no denial, no confirmation. And after half a century, people realized something unsettling. Maybe the truth was never hidden. Maybe it was simply impossible to categorize. Not every bond fits the words the public expects. Friendship, love, mentorship, partnership. Theirs seemed to exist somewhere outside those definitions, and that ambiguity was exactly why the story never faded. By the time Connie Smith reached her 80s, the industry no longer expected revelations. Most stories from that era had already been told, retold, and polished into safe nostalgia. Legends usually end with neat explanations, beginnings, conflicts, resolutions. But theirs never did. During a quiet interview late in life, she was asked again, not directly, but close enough. After decades, the question had softened into something almost respectful. Not what were you to each other, but why did it matter so much? This time, she didn't avoid it. She explained that from the beginning, Bill Anderson didn't just hear her voice. He recognized something she herself didn't understand yet. And once someone sees your future before you do, Your lives become permanently connected in a way that doesn't require romance to feel intimate. She paused before continuing. Fame, she said, forces people into roles. The industry wanted neat definitions: manager, writer, friend, lover. But some bonds form before labels exist. And once the public demands a category, the real connection disappears. So they never gave one, not because there was something scandalous to hide, but because explaining it would reduce it. For decades, they chose the same response: respect, distance, and silence. Not coordinated, not rehearsed, just understood. They instinctively protected the origin of it all. That first moment in a small room where one person heard
J.F. Lawton finished it in 1987. It was not a romantic comedy. It was a bleak drama about prostitution, addiction, and class exploitation in Los Angeles. No opera scene, no shopping montage. No fairy tale ending, and definitely no knight in shining armor climbing a fire escape. In Lawton's early drafts, Vivian was not the bubbly, wide-eyed dreamer played by Julia Roberts.
Julia, big soccer fan.
Yes.
Is it Man United you support?
Yes.
Oh, come on!
Come on! You won't detour me.
But you go to see them, like, you go to the...
I've been to Old Trafford.
Yeah.
I'm a true fan.
Yeah, we've got pictures of you. This is you, I don't know what, dressed
Me with Marcus Rashford.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Thank you.
She was struggling with drug use. She was trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. The script made it clear. There was no prince coming to rescue her. Edward Lewis, the corporate raider, later portrayed by Richard Gere, wasn't charming or emotionally confused. He was calculated, detached, cold. The $3,000 wasn't romantic. It was transactional, brutal, clinical, and the ending. After the week together, Edward simply leaves.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That makes me
that's
feel
epic.
so
That's
good.
epic.
He just,
Yeah.
oh.
And here's you getting a lovely gift.
Yes.
Did you get one? Yeah. And how did this happen? How did Julia Roberts become a fan?
I have 3 children, and when they were really little and started playing soccer and started watching it on TV, and I didn't ever realize how exciting it was to watch it on television, and we just got so into it, and somehow just Manchester United became our team, the Motor family team, our team.
No promises, no transformation. Vivian is dropped back onto the streets, alone. That was the message. Money wins, power wins. The system doesn't change. When the script began circulating in Hollywood in the late 1980s, it drew attention for its raw honesty. But it also made executives nervous. Studios feared audiences wouldn't pay to see something that harsh. Eventually, the project landed at Touchstone Pictures, a division of the Walt Disney Company. Yes, Disney. At the time, Disney was trying to expand into more adult-themed films.
You're in Pretty Woman, aren't you, with Richard Gere?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I'm the pretty woman, and no, I play he is lost one night in Hollywood and stops and asks me for directions, and after a couple moments, I kind of just jump into his car, and we basically strike a deal where I will spend the week that he's in Los Angeles on business with him for $3,000, and it's kind of what happens over the course of that week. And what a week, you know?
Hey, congratulations.
Under executives like Jeffrey Katzenberg, the studio was pushing boundaries, but even they hesitated. According to multiple production accounts from 1988 and 1989, the studio was concerned the original script was too depressing to market. The late 1980s box office favored escapism. Dark social commentary wasn't trending. Producer Laura Ziskin and director Gary Marshall were brought in to reshape the material. And that's when everything changed. Marshall saw potential, but not in the darkness. He believed audiences needed hope. He began softening scenes. The drug storyline was removed entirely. Vivian's background was rewritten. Her vulnerability remained, but her desperation was toned down. The script shifted from social critique to modern Cinderella story, but not without tension. Industry insiders later revealed that some early investors were divided. There were concerns about glamorizing prostitution. Conservative advocacy groups in 1989 were already criticizing Hollywood for moral decline. the studio had to walk a careful line and confronting the reality of her situation more bluntly. Those moments were removed. The final act was rewritten multiple times before filming concluded in early 1990. The ending we know, Edward overcoming his fear of heights and climbing the fire escape, was a late creative decision influenced by Gary Marshall's push for symbolic redemption. But some insiders quietly questioned whether the transformation sanitized the original message beyond recognition. Was it evolution or was it erasure? By the time Pretty Woman premiered on the 23rd of March, 1990, the darker version of 3000 had been effectively buried. Audiences embraced the fantasy. The box office exploded. Julia Roberts received an Academy Award nomination at the 63rd Academy Awards in 1991, and Hollywood declared it a triumph. But beneath the glossy surface, fragments of the original story remained, in dialogue choices, in lingering camera shots, in the tension that occasionally breaks through the laughter. By the time filming began in late 1989, the script had changed, but the tension hadn't. On set in Los Angeles, director Gary Marshall was walking a tightrope. The studio wanted charm, the marketing team wanted a fantasy, but the actors, they were still wrestling with the darker DNA of 3000. Julia Roberts was only 21 years old. She later admitted in interviews that certain scenes made her extremely uncomfortable. One early draft scene, eventually removed, reportedly involved a more aggressive physical dynamic between Vivian and Edward during their initial hotel encounter. The tone, according to crew members, was less romantic, more transactional. That version was filmed once. It never made the final cut. Some insiders claim Roberts was visibly shaken after that take. Marshall quickly adjusted the blocking and dialogue to soften the dynamic. The final version replaced tension with awkward humor, but not every scene was so easily reshaped. Richard Gere initially approached Edward as emotionally distant and morally ambiguous. During rehearsals, Gere reportedly questioned whether Edward's power over Vivian was being romanticized. Crew accounts from 1989 describe creative disagreements between Gere and producers over how cold Edward should appear. One source close to production later claimed that Gere felt the character bordered on predatory in earlier drafts. Producer Laura Ziskin allegedly pushed for lighter rewrites to maintain commercial appeal. The studio feared backlash if Edward appeared exploitative, rather than misunderstood. And backlash was already brewing. In early 1990, before the film's release, advocacy groups criticized Hollywood for glamorizing prostitution. Executives at the Walt Disney Company were reportedly concerned about reputational damage. Remember, this was Disney's adult label division, but the parent brand still mattered. Under executive leadership, including Jeffrey Katzenberg, the studio had to carefully manage public perception. Test screenings in February 1990 revealed something interesting. Audiences loved Julia Roberts. They were less sure about Edward. Some feedback cards described him as controlling. Others wrote that the relationship dynamic felt unbalanced. One early screening reportedly ended with lukewarm applause. That's when the ending was adjusted. Again, the now iconic fire escape finale was intensified in reshoots to frame Edward as transformed. The fear of hate subplot became symbolic redemption. The goal was clear, shift the narrative from transaction to love story. But there was another scene that caused friction, the necklace incident. In the famous jewelry box moment, Edward snaps the box shut on Vivian's fingers as a joke, the laugh we see from Roberts. That was real. It wasn't scripted. Marshall kept it in. What many don't know is that earlier takes of that scene played differently. Colder, less playful. Editors reportedly selected the most charming version to counterbalance darker undertones in surrounding scenes. Then there was the Rodeo Drive confrontation. During filming in Beverly Hills, crew members recalled real shoppers reacting angrily to the subject matter. Some bystanders reportedly shouted insults during takes. Security had to manage the crowd discreetly to avoid press attention because the truth was this: Hollywood was nervous. If the film leaned too far into realism, it risked controversy. If it leaned too far into fantasy, it risked criticism. And inside the production, not everyone agreed on where that line should be. There are persistent rumors, never officially confirmed, that a longer cut of the film once existed, a version closer to Lawton's original tone industry. Archivists have speculated that early assembly edits ran significantly darker before studio notes reshaped the narrative. If that cut still exists, it has never been released. By the time Pretty Woman premiered on the 23rd of March, 1990, audiences saw a polished romance. They didn't see the arguments in it had grossed over $463 million worldwide, a staggering number for that era. Julia Roberts became a household name almost overnight. She was nominated for Best Actress at the 63rd Academy Awards in March 1991. Magazine covers followed, interviews, endorsements. The industry crowned her America's sweetheart. But while audiences embraced the fantasy, critics were sharpening their knives. Prominent feminist commentators in 1990 argued the film glamorized prostitution and softened systemic inequality. Several opinion columns published that spring described the story as Cinderella funded by capitalism. Others claimed it sent a dangerous message that wealth redeems exploitation. Even some journalists pressed Richard Gere during press tours about the morality of Edward's character. In multiple interviews, Gere emphasized that the story was about emotional growth, not transaction. Still, the questions didn't stop. What made the backlash more intense was the cultural timing. The late 1980s and early 1990s were marked by economic anxiety and visible wealth gaps in America. Corporate takeovers were dominating headlines. Edward Lewis, the corporate raider, symbolized a very real Wall Street archetype. Some critics argued the film humanized that figure too conveniently. Meanwhile, advocacy groups focused on how sex workers were portrayed. Organizations representing real-life women in prostitution criticized the film for presenting a sanitized, unrealistic depiction of street life. The original 3000 script, with its darker tone, might have aligned more closely with their concerns. But that version had been erased. During interviews in 1990 and 1991, director Gary Marshall consistently defended the film as a romantic fable. He rejected claims that it promoted exploitation, stating that it was ultimately about two lonely people finding connection. Yet behind closed doors, studio executives were aware of the controversy. Touchstone Pictures, operating under the Walt Disney Company, monitored media narratives carefully. The brand could not afford sustained moral outrage. Publicly, the numbers drowned out criticism. Privately, some industry analysts questioned whether the film's success came at a reputational cost. There was also another layer of intrigue: the power imbalance debate. Throughout 1990, television talk shows hosted heated discussions about whether Edward rescued Vivian or simply purchased her transformation. The shopping montage on Rodeo Drive became iconic, but also symbolic. Was it empowerment, or was it validation through luxury? Even cast members felt the pressure. Roberts, in later interviews during the 1990s, admitted she didn't fully grasp the cultural impact at the time of filming. She was 21. The role catapulted her into global fame, but it also defined her early career. Suddenly, she wasn't just an actress. She was a symbol, and symbols attract scrutiny. Meanwhile, rumors circulated in industry circles that certain critics had seen earlier script drafts before release. Whispers of a darker ending resurfaced in Hollywood conversations. Some wondered whether the softened narrative had diluted what could have been a more socially powerful film. But controversy didn't slow momentum. Home video sales surged in 1991. The soundtrack, featuring Roy Orbison's "Oh, Pretty Woman," climbed charts again. The film embedded itself in pop culture. Yet here's what's rarely discussed. The backlash forced Hollywood to reconsider how it handled stories involving sex work. Studios became more cautious. Romanticizing transactional relationships would face heavier scrutiny in the years that followed. In many ways, Pretty Woman marked a turning point. It proved that audiences would embrace fantasy, even when rooted in uncomfortable realities. But it also revealed a fracture between commercial success and social responsibility. By late 1991, the fairy tale had officially won, but the debate never truly ended. By 1991, Pretty Woman was no longer just a movie. It was a business case study. And whenever a film generates that level of money, over $463 million worldwide, questions follow about contracts, about back-end deals, about who really benefited. At the center of it all was Julia Roberts. When she signed on in 1989, she was still an emerging actress. Her salary for Pretty Woman was reported to be around $300,000, a respectable number at the time, but nowhere near what established stars were commanding. After the film's release on the 23rd of March, 1990, everything changed. Within a year, Roberts' asking price skyrocketed. By 1991, she was per project, becoming one of the highest paid actresses in Hollywood history at that time. But here's where industry intrigue enters the story. Unlike some A-list actors who negotiate profit participation deals, Roberts did not receive a significant percentage of the film's back-end profits. Most of the financial windfall flowed through studio structures tied to Touchstone Pictures and its parent company, the Walt Disney Company. In Hollywood, back-end participation is everything. Points on the gross, percentages of net profits, those details determine who becomes wealthy beyond salary. And insiders have long speculated that Pretty Woman reshaped how young actors negotiate contracts, because Roberts' career exploded. But the long-term financial structure favored the studio. Then there were the sequel rumors. Almost immediately after the film's box office dominance in 1990, studio executives reportedly explored the possibility of a sequel. Trade publications at the time suggested early development conversations occurred in 1991, but it never materialized. Why? Multiple factors. First, creative resistance. Director Gary Marshall publicly stated that the story felt complete. Second, tone concerns. Any sequel would have had to address the reality of Edward and Vivian's long-term relationship. Would it still be fantasy? Or would it confront real-world complications? Third, contract negotiations. Both Roberts and Richard Gere would have commanded significantly higher salaries by 1992. The financial equation had changed. And then there were the persistent rumors, the lost cut whispers that never fully disappeared. Throughout the 1990s, film archivists and industry insiders speculated that an earlier assembly version of the movie existed, closer in tone to J.F. Lawton's 1987 screenplay 3000. Darker, less romantic, more critical of wealth disparity. No confirmed alternate cut. The hotel penthouse, brooding, reflective, became one of the film's most memorable images. According to production notes, that scene evolved significantly from early drafts. Initially written as shorter and colder, it was expanded to humanize Edward. That expansion shifted audience sympathy. Was it artistic instinct or strategic rewriting? Hollywood insiders understand one truth: perception determines profit. In 1990, America wanted hope. The Cold War was ending. Economic uncertainty loomed. Audiences craved escapism. The studio delivered exactly that. But behind every fairy tale is a negotiation, creative control, financial leverage, public narrative. By the mid-1990s, Pretty Woman had cemented itself as a cultural landmark. Yet the questions about what was removed, softened, or strategically reshaped never fully vanished. Because sometimes the most powerful scenes in a film are the ones you never get to see. More than 3 decades after its release, on the 23rd of March 1990, Pretty Woman remains one of the most recognizable romantic films ever made. But its legacy, still controversial. On paper, the numbers are undeniable. Over $463 million worldwide. An Academy Award nomination for Julia Roberts at the 63rd Academy Awards. A soundtrack that redefined pop nostalgia. A cultural imprint that turned a red dress and thigh-high boots into cinematic shorthand. Yet beneath the fairy tale ending, the fire escape, the flowers, the kiss, the debate never disappeared. Did Hollywood transform a sharp social critique into a glossy fantasy to protect profits? Or did it rescue a bleak story and give audiences hope? The original 1987 screenplay by J.F. Lawton, titled 3000, would likely have been remembered very differently. No rescue, no transformation, no redemption arc for Edward Lewis. Just the harsh reality of money and power. Instead, under director Gary Marshall and producers including Laura Ziskin, the story evolved into a romantic fable. Some argue that change made it timeless. Others argue it erased something important. Over the years, critics revisited the film through new cultural lenses. In the 2000s and 2010s, discussions around gender dynamics, economic imbalance, and power structures intensified. Modern reviewers questioned whether Edward's wealth imbalance romanticized dependency. Even Richard Gere acknowledged in later interviews that the film reflects a specific era, late-1980s capitalism at its most visible and unapologetic. And here's the truth. Hollywood rarely says out loud if Pretty Woman were pitched in its original 3000 form today. It might be greenlit as a prestige drama. If the 1990 fairy tale version were pitched today, it might face heavy social media backlash before filming even began. Timing mattered.
Strasberg. He believed in emotional truth, in motivation, in psychological depth. Hollywood believed in something else. In the 1950s and 1960s, the director was absolute authority. The old studio system was weakening, but on set the rule remains simple. The director decides. The actor obeys. In 1966, Newman starred in the Cold War thriller, Torn Curtain. The director was Alfred Hitchcock. At the time, Hitchcock was 67 years old. He had already made Psycho in 1960, Vertigo in 1958, and Rear Window in 1954. He was untouchable. Newman expected collaboration. Hitchcock expected control. Hitchcock had famously said in a 1963 interview, "Actors are cattle." He later claimed he was misquoted, but the attitude was well known. He storyboarded everything in advance and disliked actors who tried to reinterpret scenes. For him, performances were technical elements, not emotional explorations. Newman, trained in method acting, tried to discuss character motivation. Hitchcock reportedly showed little interest. Years later, Newman admitted that there was no creative connection between them. He described the experience as cold, controlled, mechanical. There was no screaming, no dramatic scandal, just a silent assertion of power. And that wasn't the only name. Another was Otto Preminger. Born in 1905 in Vienna, Preminger arrived in Hollywood in the 1930s. He directed Laura in 1944, and in 1944 and 1959. Critics praised him as bold and intelligent. Actors had a different perspective. Preminger was known for explosive temper tantrums. He would shout at performers in front of the entire crew. He would humiliate them. He believed pressure produced better results. In 1963, Judy Garland worked with him on In the Cool of the Day. Later accounts described intense tension on set. Preminger's authoritarian style was not unusual for the time. It was accepted, sometimes even admired. Newman, in his private recordings, reflected on this culture. "Some directors think terror is a method," he said. He did not call them evil. He did not frame himself as a victim. He talked about the system. Between 1960 and 1975, Hollywood Hill, Newman had become one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. Studios trusted him. Audiences trusted him. But power in Hollywood is relative. No matter how famous the actor, the director still controlled the set. And in that era, some directors ruled through fear. The late 1960s and early 1970s are often romanticized as the golden age of New Hollywood. Young filmmakers were breaking rules. Studios were taking risks. Films were becoming darker, more psychological, more daring. But behind that creative revolution, old hierarchies remained. Take Alfred Hitchcock again. By the time Newman worked with him in 1966, Hitchcock's authority was absolute. Crew members rarely questioned him. Actors were expected to adapt. When Torn Curtain underperformed critically compared to Hitchcock's earlier work, blame quietly shifted toward casting choices and studio interference, not toward the director's rigid methods. That was the pattern. Responsibility flowed downward. Authority stayed at the top. Newman later reflected that actors were often treated as replaceable components. If a performance didn't align with the director's precise vision, the actor was the problem. Not the communication. Not the leadership. The system reinforced silence. Otto Preminger operated in a similar climate. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Preminger's temper was well documented. On the set of Anatomy of a Murder in 1959, crew members described intense pressure. He demanded endless retakes. He publicly corrected actors. His authority was theatrical and intimidating. Yet studios continued hiring him. Why? Because he delivered. The industry's logic was simple. Results justified behavior. Newman understood something crucial by the mid-1970s. Hollywood didn't create tyrants. It rewarded them. Directors who dominated the room were often labeled strong. Those who intimidated were called demanding. Emotional volatility was reframed as passion, and passion was romanticized. Even as the industry modernized, accountability did not keep pace. During this period, directors such as Stanley Kubrick were also known for extreme control. Kubrick, born in 1928, was famous for demanding dozens, sometimes hundreds, of takes. On The Shining in 1980, he pushed actors to psychological limits. While Kubrick was respected as a perfectionist, his methods sparked debate even then. The question was rarely asked publicly. Where is the line between dedication and domination? Newman's recordings suggested he wrestled with that boundary. He acknowledged that filmmaking requires leadership. It requires vision. It requires discipline. But he also recognized the difference between discipline and humiliation, between intensity and cruelty, between genius and ego. In private conversations, he admitted that early in his career he stayed quiet when he felt dismissed. He feared being labeled uncooperative. In the 1950s, careers could collapse quickly. The industry was smaller. Word traveled fast. One complaint could close doors. By the time he gained leverage in the 1970s, he noticed something else. Younger actors faced the same pressures he once had. Nothing had fundamentally changed. The faces were new. The structure was not. The myth of the all-powerful director remained intact. Hollywood mythology depends on singular vision, the director as auteur, the mastermind, the genius. But Newman had seen enough to question that mythology. He knew that films were collaborations. Cinematographers, editors, actors, writers, all contributed. Yet when awards were handed out, one name dominated. And with that dominance came insulation. Insulation from criticism. Insulation from consequences. The industry rarely asked how performances were extracted, only whether they worked. In 1986, when Newman finally won the Academy Award for Best Actor for The Color of Money, directed by Martin Scorsese, the narrative celebrated perseverance. Talent rewarded. Legacy affirmed. But by then, Newman had spent decades observing the machinery behind the curtain. He had seen directors who inspired loyalty through respect. And he had seen those who commanded through fear. The difference was invisible to the audience. On screen, the results could look identical. That was the most unsettling part. Because if success erases the method, then method no longer matters. By the late 1970s, when Newman recorded his reflections, he wasn't exposing individual monsters. He was exposing normalization. The normalization of imbalance. The normalization of silence. By the mid-1970s, Paul Newman had something most actors never achieve. Security. He had box office credibility. Critical respect. Industry influence. By then, he had worked steadily for nearly 2 decades. He could afford to say no. But earlier in his career, that wasn't the case. In the 1950s, Hollywood still operated under the shadow of the studio system. Contracts were restrictive. Reputations were fragile. Being labeled difficult could quietly end opportunities. Newman understood that very early. When he arrived in Hollywood after television work in New York, he was competing against men like Marlon Brando and James Dean. The margin for error was small. Studios wanted obedience, reliability, marketability, not resistance. During the filming of Torn Curtain in 1966 with Alfred Hitchcock, Newman later admitted he struggled internally. He disagreed with Hitchcock's detached approach to actors. He felt creatively blocked, but he common, and fear was practical. The entertainment industry is built on relationships. Casting decisions often depend on informal conversations. A single negative impression can circulate quietly through agents and producers. Newman described this atmosphere as subtle but powerful. There were no written threats, no formal punishments, just silence. Phones that stopped ringing, careers that stalled without explanation. Otto Preminger's style exemplified this culture of intimidation. Actors who challenged him risked being dismissed or sidelined. Yet few did. The power dynamic discouraged confrontation. What made it more complicated was the fact that some of these directors produced remarkable films that blurred the moral line. If the final product was acclaimed, if critics praised it, if audiences responded, then the internal cost was considered irrelevant. Success neutralized scrutiny. In the late 1960s and 1970s, a new generation of filmmakers emerged. Directors like Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese gained prominence. They were seen as artists rather than authoritarian studio employees. But even within this so-called creative revolution, hierarchy remained strong. The director still controlled the final cut in many cases. The director shaped the tone. The director's name defined the film. And when authority concentrates in one role, accountability weakens. Newman did not claim that every director abused power. He worked with individuals he respected deeply. George Roy Hill, for example, maintained a reputation for professionalism and mutual respect. During Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969 and The Sting in 1973. But Newman recognized something broader. Hollywood had built a mythology around the director as visionary genius. Visionaries are not easily questioned. By the time Newman recorded his reflections in 1978, he had watched the industry for over 20 years. Stressful. Boundaries blurred easily. Newman observed that this culture was self-reinforcing. If a director delivered critical success, like Alfred Hitchcock with Psycho in 1960, his authority expanded. If a director pushed actors relentlessly but produced acclaim, like Otto Preminger with Anatomy of a Murder in 1959, the narrative became one of brilliance under pressure. Results shielded methods. The public saw finished films. They did not see rehearsals. They did not see private arguments. They did not see exhaustion or humiliation. And in the absence of visibility, there was no accountability. By the late 1970s, Hollywood was shifting economically. Blockbusters like Jaws in 1975 and Star Wars in 1977 redefined profitability. Studios became increasingly corporate. Financial stakes grew higher. With higher stakes came even greater concentration of power. Directors who could deliver large-scale success gained unprecedented influence. Negotiating leverage increased. Creative control expanded. Accountability did not expand with it. Newman reflected on this imbalance privately. He did not campaign publicly against individuals. He did not accuse by name. What disturbed him was systemic. He understood something many outsiders missed. Power in Hollywood is rarely explicit. There are no formal declarations of immunity. There is reputation. There is momentum. There is fear of disruption. A studio facing a major production does not want scandal. It does not want conflict headlines. It does not want instability. So tension is often resolved quietly or ignored. Actors, especially younger ones, face asymmetrical risk. If they resist a powerful director, they risk being labeled uncooperative. That label can circulate invisibly. Casting decisions can shift subtly. Opportunities can evaporate without explanation. Newman had reached a point in his career where that risk no longer applied to him, but he remembered when it did. He remembered the early years when one misstep could define a reputation. He also recognized something else. The mythology of genius creates moral blind spots. When someone is framed as indispensable, criticism feels dangerous. The industry tells itself that strong personalities are necessary for strong art. That suffering proves commitment. Newman questioned that logic. He had seen directors who inspired excellence through clarity and respect. He had seen others who relied on intimidation. The results, on screen, could look similar, but the internal experience was not. The culture, however, rarely distinguished between the two. It celebrated outcomes, not methods. By the 1990s and early 2000s, Hollywood began facing public conversations about misconduct and abuse of power. Allegations surfaced against powerful figures in various roles: producers, executives, performers. The conversations that would erupt publicly decades later had been simmering privately for generations. Newman's reflections, recorded in 1978, were not explosive revelations. They were early acknowledgments that talent does not excuse cruelty, that authority without oversight drifts toward excess, that silence enables continuity. He understood that industries protect what benefits them. Directors who delivered awards and revenue were valuable assets. Value creates insulation, and insulation delays consequence. Newman did not frame the story as heroes versus villains. He framed it as imbalance, as normalization, as a culture that quietly absorbed discomfort because challenging it seemed riskier than enduring it. By the time he reached the later years of his life, he had shifted his focus toward philanthropy and social causes. He founded Newman's Own in 1982. Channeling profits to charity, he stepped back from relentless industry competition. Perhaps distance sharpened perspective. Perhaps time made reflection easier. What is clear is this. He had seen how power concentrated. He had seen how reputation shielded behavior. And he had seen how the system sustained itself. Not through dramatic conspiracies, but through quiet acceptance. And that realization was harder to dismiss than any individual name. Because systems outlive personalities. And unless questioned, they repeat themselves. Paul Newman died on the 26th of September 2008, at the age of 83. The headlines were predictable: legend, icon, philanthropist, movie star, clips from Cool Hand Luke, quotes from The Hustler, images from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Hollywood remembered the smile, the blue eyes, the charisma. It did not remember the tape recorder. It did not remember the quiet reflections from 1978. Because history prefers clean narratives. Newman's recordings, later reconstructed and published decades after his death, did not explode with scandal. They did not accuse specific individuals of crimes. They did not name villains in dramatic fashion. What they revealed was subtler and more unsettling. They revealed awareness. Awareness that genius can become a shield. Awareness that reputation can silence criticism. Awareness that power, when left unchecked, expands naturally. Newman never framed himself as morally superior. He admitted his own flaws, his ego, his insecurity, his struggle with alcohol during different periods of his life. He acknowledged that he, too, benefited from the system once he gained influence. That is what makes his perspective difficult to dismiss. He wasn't attacking Hollywood from the outside. He was describing it from within. The directors he worked with, Alfred Hitchcock, Otto Preminger, George Roy Hill, and others, remain embedded in film history as artists. Their contributions are studied in film schools. Their work continues to influence modern cinema. And that is true. They were influential. They shaped the language of film. But influence does not erase complexity. Newman understood that the public sees finished frames, not the process behind them. They see performance, not power dynamics. They see awards, not negotiations. The industry constructs mythology efficiently. Directors become auteurs. Actors become icons. Films become landmarks. Tension becomes anecdote. Conflict becomes trivia. Behavior becomes footnote. The deeper question Newman raised was not whether certain directors were evil. It was whether the culture that protected excess ever truly changed. By the time conversations about abuse of power became widespread in Hollywood decades later, many of the figures from Newman's era were gone. The system had evolved technologically and financially, but structurally, power still concentrated at the top. The language changed. The hierarchy did not disappear. Newman's legacy is often defined by generosity. In 1982, he founded Newman's Own, donating profits to charitable causes. By the time of his death, hundreds of millions of dollars had been directed to philanthropy. That part of his life is celebrated, and rightly so. But the quieter legacy may be his honesty. In private, without cameras, without applause, he recorded reflections that complicated the legend. He did not call for revolution. He did not stage confrontation. He simply documented what he had seen. And sometimes documentation is enough, because systems rely on invisibility. Once observed clearly, they become harder to romanticize. Paul Newman's story is not one of dramatic exposure. It is a story of gradual realization. A young actor enters Hollywood in the 1950s believing in craft. A star rises in the 1960s navigating authority. A veteran in the 1970s begins questioning the culture around him. An elder in the 1980s and beyond steps back and reflects. He saw directors who inspired greatness. He saw others who relied on dominance. He saw an industry that blurred the difference. And he understood something essential. Power rarely announces itself as cruelty. It presents itself as necessity, as vision, as leadership, as genius. History remembers the films. It rarely examines the method. Newman left behind performances that endure. But he also left behind questions about accountability, about myth, about the cost of silence. Those questions remain relevant long after the cameras stop rolling. And perhaps that is the final truth he understood. Hollywood changes faces. It changes technology. It changes headlines. But unless its structures are examined, it changes very slowly at its core. The tape recorder clicked off in 1978. The reflection, however, never really ended.
It's dull. It's, nobody's enjoying. I grew up in a neighborhood with lots of different types of people, a lot of different nationalities, and along the way, because I moved a lot, I was born in the Depression, and so I moved a lot, and I knew a lot of people, and I always enjoyed the differences. And I think if people enjoy the differences in everybody, then they are willing to, to have fun with it. We used to have fun with it. We'd insult each other and laugh and scratch with it, and it was not a bad thing. People didn't take themselves that seriously at that point in time.
He's supposed to be done. That's the story everyone keeps telling. But the problem is simple. Clint Eastwood doesn't agree, and nothing in his recent behavior suggests a man preparing to disappear. At an age when most directors are remembered through tributes and restored classics, Eastwood is still operating like someone with unfinished business, quietly, methodically, without asking for permission. After the release of Juror #2, many assumed it would be framed as his final statement. One last courtroom drama, one last reflection on guilt, morality, and consequence. Instead, what happened behind the scenes tells a very different story. Multiple industry sources confirm that Eastwood has been actively reviewing new scripts throughout late 2025 and into 2026. Not passively, not as a formality, actively. Giving notes, asking questions, refining structure. This alone breaks the expected narrative. Studios don't normally send fresh material to directors in their mid-90 seconds, unless they believe there's a real chance something will move forward. And in Eastwood's case, that belief is backed by numbers, not nostalgia. Here's the part that makes executives uncomfortable. Eastwood's workflow is still faster and cheaper than most directors half his age. His productions rarely go over schedule. He avoids bloated crews. He shoots with intention. One take, sometimes two, then he moves on. Time is not wasted chasing perfection. He trusts instinct. That approach terrifies modern studios built on endless coverage, reshoots, and committee approvals. But it also saves millions. There's also the question no one likes to say out loud. Control. Eastwood does not negotiate creative authority the way most directors do. He doesn't fight for it, he simply requires it. If a studio wants his name, they accept his terms. Final cut. Minimal interference. No ideological overlays. No algorithm-driven rewrites. In an era where directors are often treated like replaceable parts, this alone makes him an anomaly. What are his actual plans? Based on people close to the process, Eastwood is circling stories that deal with accountability and irreversible decisions, not nostalgia pieces, not legacy sequels, stories where the past crashes into the present and forces characters to confront consequences they can't escape. One potential project reportedly centers on a man whose single choice decades earlier slowly dismantles everything he built, not through violence, but through truth. Another idea being discussed is even more stripped down. Few locations, limited cast, heavy psychological weight, the kind of film that lives or dies on silence, pauses, and what isn't said. This is important because it reveals something crucial. Eastwood isn't trying to compete with modern cinema. He's ignoring it. That's where the real conflict lies. Hollywood today is obsessed with relevance. Eastwood is obsessed with clarity. While studios chase trends, he waits them out. While franchises multiply, he narrows focus. This puts him in direct opposition to the current system, and somehow, he keeps winning. There's also the physical reality everyone keeps whispering about. Yes, he's 95. Yes, the risk exists. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Eastwood's mental sharpness remains intact, and in film, that matters more than stamina. He doesn't run around sets. He doesn't micromanage. He watches. He listens. He decides. That's the job. What truly unsettles people is not that he might direct again, it's that he doesn't seem afraid of stopping either. There's no desperation, no one last ride energy, just calm persistence. If the right story comes, he'll do it. If it doesn't, he won't force it. That mindset alone separates him from nearly everyone else in the industry. Everyone assumes they understand why a man in his mid-90 seconds would still work. Legacy, ego, habit. But none of those explanations survive contact with Clint Eastwood and the way he actually operates behind closed doors. Here's the first detail that should raise eyebrows. Eastwood does not plan projects like someone racing against time. There is no urgency in his decision-making, no panic, no checklist titled Final Films. Instead, he behaves like someone who expects to be taken seriously tomorrow, next year, and beyond. That alone contradicts every public assumption about his stage of life. People close to him describe a routine that hasn't softened with age. Scripts are read early in the morning, notes are handwritten, conversations are short, precise, and unsentimental. When something doesn't interest him, it's dismissed without drama. When something does, he digs into it with quiet intensity. This is not a man killing time. This is a man selecting weapons. What really creates tension inside Hollywood is not his age, it's his refusal to adapt to the modern system. Eastwood does not pitch himself. He does not attend development meetings filled with 20 voices. He does not reshape stories to satisfy demographic charts. He expects the story to stand on its own. If it can't, he walks away. Studios know this, and yet they still come back. Why? Because Eastwood represents something the industry has nearly lost: predictability through discipline. His films don't implode during production. They don't balloon into chaos. Insurance companies may hesitate at first, but once they look at his track record, hesitation turns into calculation. He is low risk in a high-risk business, an absurd statement on paper, but one backed by decades of results. Now, here's where the curiosity deepens. Eastwood's recent interests suggest a thematic shift that feels intentional. Not louder, not bigger, quieter, more uncomfortable. Stories where the drama isn't external, but internal. Guilt without redemption, authority without certainty, justice without clean endings. These are not crowd pleasers in the traditional sense, and that's exactly why he's drawn to them. One producer who reviewed a recent concept described it as a film that refuses to tell the audience how to feel. No speeches, no musical cues signaling morality, just actions and consequences left to collide in silence. This kind of storytelling is increasingly rare and increasingly risky, which raises a crucial question: why pursue it now? The answer may lie in Eastwood's relationship with time. He does not seem interested in being remembered as prolific. He's interested in being precise. Every project is weighed not against public expectation, but against a personal threshold. Does this story justify existing? If the answer is no, nothing else matters. There's also a power dynamic at play. Few talk about openly. Eastwood has outlasted trends, executives, and entire studio regimes. He has seen cycles rise and collapse. That gives him leverage no contract can manufacture. When he considers a project, it's not about career advancement, it's about whether the system will get out of his way. If it won't, he waits, and the system, more often than not, bends. This is where the what the fuck moment really lands. Eastwood doesn't fight modern Hollywood. He ignores it until it adjusts around him. While others negotiate relevance, he operates outside the noise. No social media presence, no narrative management, no public reassurance. Just work or the absence of it. And that absence is deliberate, because the most dangerous position in any industry is the person who doesn't need approval to continue. Clint Eastwood isn't postponing retirement. He's rejecting the premise entirely and doing it so calmly that no one knows how to stop him. The public story says age slows everyone down. The private reality around Clint Eastwood suggests the opposite age has stripped away everything unnecessary, leaving only intent. By this stage, Eastwood isn't interested in proving endurance. He's testing precision. People inside the industry confirm that when a project crosses his desk, the first thing he asks is not about budget or casting. He asks how much control the story demands, not how much he gets, how much it needs. If the answer involves compromise, dilution, or market adjustments, the conversation usually ends there. This is where the numbers start to matter. Eastwood's late-career films consistently operate in a range most studios would consider conservative. Budgets are controlled, schedules are tight, crew sizes are lean. That isn't a limitation, it's a philosophy. Fewer moving parts mean fewer excuses. Every person on set has a job, and every job has a reason. That structure makes his productions unusually resilient, even by modern standards. One executive reportedly described working with Eastwood as removing noise from the system. There are no daily rewrites based on social media reactions, no last-minute tone shifts to chase trends. Once the film begins, the direction is locked. That level of certainty is almost extinct in contemporary filmmaking, and it explains why some studios quietly hope he never retires. He solves problems they no longer know how to manage. Then there's casting, another area where assumptions fall apart. Eastwood is not chasing names, he's chasing presence. Actors who work with him often describe the experience as unnerving at first. Minimal direction, few words, long silences. He expects preparation to replace rehearsal. If an actor understands the character, Eastwood lets them exist. If they don't, it becomes painfully obvious very quickly. This approach feeds directly into the kinds of stories he's considering now. These are not films driven by spectacle. They are driven by responsibility. Characters are not rewarded for good intentions. They are measured by outcomes. There is no cinematic forgiveness. That moral coldness is intentional and increasingly rare. What makes this phase particularly unsettling is that Eastwood appears completely comfortable walking away. That paradox gives him leverage. When someone doesn't need the next project, they choose better ones. When they don't need approval, they avoid compromise. Eastwood has reached a point where absence is power. Every year he doesn't announce retirement, keeps the door open, and keeps the industry guessing. Behind the scenes, conversations continue, quietly. No press releases, no countdowns, just scripts circulating, being read, being rejected, being refined. The pace is slow, but the standard is ruthless. People familiar with the process say it's not unusual for him to dismiss a project after weeks of consideration with a single sentence, "It doesn't hold." That phrase matters. It suggests that what Eastwood is ultimately chasing isn't relevance, impact, or even legacy. It's weight. Does the story hold up under silence, under time, under scrutiny without explanation? If not, it doesn't deserve to be made regardless of who's attached. This mindset directly contradicts the way modern content is produced. Today's industry rewards speed, volume, and visibility. Eastwood is operating on a different axis entirely. He values restraint. He trusts the audience to think. He refuses to underline meaning. And somehow, that restraint has become his loudest statement. The uncomfortable truth for Hollywood is this: Clint Eastwood doesn't need a final film to close his career. His refusal to announce an ending already is one. There's a moment every system fears when someone understands it so well they no longer need to obey it. That is where Clint Eastwood exists right now. What separates Eastwood from nearly everyone else still working at his level is not energy or nostalgia, it's detachment. He is no longer emotionally invested in outcomes. Box office doesn't define him. Awards don't validate him. Public approval doesn't guide him. That freedom changes how decisions are made, and it's why his next move, whatever it is, will land heavier than expected. People around him say the same thing quietly. He's not trying to say goodbye. He's trying to say something clean, something without noise, without explanation. That's why there's no roadmap, no trilogy, no closing chapter being marketed. If a film happens, it happens because it earns its existence, not because time demands it. This creates an unusual tension. studios want clarity, anything at all. There's also a deeper layer people rarely mention. Eastwood has lived long enough to see reputations rewritten, films dismissed on release later canonized, moral panics fade, cultural certainty collapse. That perspective breeds patience. He doesn't rush because he knows time is the final editor, and time has consistently been on his side. Those close to him say he's fully aware that any future project may be his last. But that awareness doesn't translate into sentimentality. It translates into refusal. Refusal to soften. Refusal to compromise. Refusal to explain himself to an era that moves faster but understands less. This is where the final "what the fuck" really lands. Eastwood is not defying death. He's ignoring distraction. He's not trying to outlive anything. He's simply refusing to let the noise decide when meaning stops. And that position is deeply unsettling in an industry built on constant signaling. If he makes another film, it will not arrive as a victory lap. It will arrive quietly. No announcement tour, no emotional framing, just a story placed in front of the audience and left there uninterpreted, unprotected. And if he doesn't, the effect is the same. The myth remains incomplete, the ending unresolved, the system denied closure. That may be his most deliberate act yet.
I did a play at the neighborhood playhouse way back called The Midnight Caller. And that night, Kim Stanley came, Robert Mulligan, Horton and his wife. I played a drunk guy, kid guy, looking for some of his girlfriend. And about 2 years later, when they were to cast the part of To Kill a Mockingbird, Horton Foote's wife said, "What about that boy we saw at the neighborhood playhouse?" So that's what, and Robert Mulligan, the director, had been there that night, so.
Hollywood doesn't usually wake up quietly. Rumors start. Assistants whisper, managers verify, and only then does the world find out. But this time, the phones rang first. Early Sunday morning in Middleburg, Virginia, inside a private home far from red carpets and paparazzi, Robert Duvall died at the age of 95. No hospital chaos, no dramatic announcement. Just a confirmation sent to a publicist. And within minutes, the industry froze. Because actors die every year, legends don't. At least not the ones who still controlled rooms without raising their voice. Within 30 minutes, studio executives were calling former Godfather crew members. Old production assistants who hadn't spoken in decades suddenly received messages. "Did you hear? Not is it true?" They already knew. The wording was different this time. Final. Al Pacino reportedly stopped a meeting when the call came in. One witness later described the reaction as unusual. No speech, no tribute, just silence and a slow nod. People who worked with both men say Pacino respected very few equals. Duvall was one of them. But as tributes began appearing publicly, something else started privately. The real conversations. The stories people never told while he was alive. Because Robert Duvall had a reputation, directors trusted him and feared what he would say after a take. On The Godfather set in 1971, crew members noticed a pattern. After watching playback, Coppola would hesitate and then adjust blocking exactly how Duvall predicted minutes earlier. Not once. Repeatedly, soon camera operators began watching Duvall's reactions instead of the director's instructions. By the second film, some insiders joked Tom Hagen wasn't just advising the Corleone family. Duvall was advising the movie itself. Then came Apocalypse Now, a production famous for chaos. Typhoons destroying sets, helicopters disappearing mid-scene for real war missions, and actors collapsing from exhaustion. Yet Duvall arrived, prepared, filmed quickly, and left. Efficient to the point it made the rest of the production look unstable. That contrast created tension. Quiet tension. The dangerous kind in Hollywood, because stars compete for attention. Duvall competed for credibility. Directors later admitted scenes changed once he walked on set. Dialogue shortened. Performances slowed. Power shifted not loudly, but unmistakably. And now he was gone. Within hours, tributes called him a giant. But privately, many used a different word, control not over fame. Over truth inside a performance. For more than 60 years, Robert Duvall didn't just act in Hollywood stories. He corrected them. In 1972, when The Godfather became a phenomenon, the public believed Brando and Al Pacino were the pillars of the film. Inside Paramount Pictures, however, Executives worried about someone else, Robert Duvall's negotiating strategy. Unlike most actors at the time, Duvall did not immediately demand a raise for The Godfather Part 2. Instead, he waited. According to a 1974 internal memo leaked years later, Duvall asked for script approval on character scenes rather than money. The studio refused. Quietly, tension grew. By 1989, the dispute exploded. When The Godfather Part III entered development, Duvall demanded a salary equal to Pacino's. Paramount offered significantly less. Duvall walked away. Publicly, sounded like a contract disagreement. Privately, Coppola reportedly called it the missing spine of the story. Many cast members believed the absence of Tom Hagen damaged the film's emotional logic, and some critics agreed. After its release in December 1990, the decision became one of Hollywood's most discussed casting conflicts. Years later, Duvall said in an interview that the issue was respect, not money. He never returned to the franchise. The result created a ripple effect. Studios began reconsidering sequel contracts. Agents used the case as precedent for character parity negotiations throughout the 1990s. Duvall had changed industry bargaining without ever holding a press conference. The Philippines, 1976. A war film about madness slowly became a real psychological war behind the camera. Typhoons destroyed sets. Helicopters were repeatedly taken by the local military for actual combat operations. Martin Sheen collapsed from exhaustion. Marlon Brando arrived overweight and unprepared. But Robert Duvall finished his scenes in less than a week. Crew accounts describe him arriving fully memorized, fully researched, and already performing the character between takes. Coppola later admitted Kilgore's scenes were among the only sequences shot on schedule. That efficiency created tension with other actors who felt the contrast made the production's instability more obvious. Rumors circulated that Duvall refused improvisation sessions involving Brando because he believed they would damage continuity. While never publicly confirmed, assistant directors claimed shooting schedules were rearranged to avoid direct rehearsal conflict between the two actors. The famous surfing attack sequence was originally written differently. Duvall allegedly suggested the calm tone that made the scene disturbing rather than loud. Coppola kept it, but reportedly feared audiences would remember Kilgore more than Willard. History proved him right. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Duvall had become what studios called dangerously respected. He was consistently nominated but rarely campaigned. In Hollywood, campaigning often mattered more than performance. For The Great Santini in 1979, several Academy voters later admitted privately they assumed he had already won before. He had not. The award went elsewhere. In 1983, Tender Mercies finally earned him the Oscar. But insiders described the victory as complicated. The film was small, inexpensive, and barely marketed. Some studio executives reportedly disliked that a quiet character drama defeated larger productions. Trade papers at the time described the result as an actor's win, not a studio's win. From that point forward, Duvall became selective to the point of frustration for producers. Scripts were rejected not for money, but for psychological inconsistency. Directors sometimes waited months for an answer only to receive a brief message. He wouldn't say that. No explanation attached. It became legend that a major 1990s thriller rewrote its ending after Duvall declined the role, stating the villain's final monologue was unrealistic. The studio never confirmed the claim, but the studio rewrite happened. In 1997, Duvall wrote, directed, produced, and starred in The Apostle. Major studios refused financing. The story involved religion, guilt, and moral ambiguity, not commercially safe themes at the same time. Rather than compromise, Duvall mortgaged property to finish the film independently. Industry executives privately warned it could end his career if it failed. Instead, the film received critical acclaim and another Academy Award nomination. This decision changed how studios viewed late-career actors controlling projects. Several independent producers later credited the film for encouraging actor-driven financing models in the early 2000s. Behind the scenes, collaborators described Duvall as intensely polite, but immovable once he made a creative decision. Arguments ended not with shouting, but silence. Crew members said silence from him was worse than anger. It meant the conversation was over. In later years, Duvall worked less frequently, but remained influential. Younger actors reportedly sought private advice from him about performance realism, rather than publicity. Duvall had already built a reputation for stopping productions without shouting. The method was simple. He would finish a take, walk to the director, and ask a single question. Why would he do that? Producers learned this question could cost a day of filming. During a 1994 newsroom drama, crew members later described a confrontation that never made headlines. The script required his character to explode emotionally during a confrontation. Duvall disagreed. He argued powerful men rarely erupt publicly unless they have already lost. The director insisted audiences needed intensity. Duvall remained polite, but refused additional takes. The set went silent for nearly 20 minutes. Eventually, the scene was rewritten, calmer, colder. The final cut became one of the film's most praised moments. This pattern repeated across decades. Assistants began marking script pages with notes. Check with Bob first. Writers quietly adjusted dialogue before presenting revisions, avoiding long debates. Some welcomed it. Others resented it deeply. A well-known screenwriter from the late 1990s later admitted an entire monologue was removed because Duvall said real people don't summarize their psychology out loud. The speech had taken weeks to craft. It disappeared in seconds. That influence created friction with younger directors who were used to total control. Yet even they noticed something uncomfortable. Audiences often reacted stronger to the restrained versions. He didn't sabotage scenes, he removed exaggeration. By the 2000s, several actors privately sought his opinion before filming emotional sequences, hoping to avoid overacting. He rarely gave direct instructions, only observations. "You're explaining instead of living," he reportedly told one performer who later credited the comment for changing his career. Not everyone appreciated the approach. Some executives felt projects slowed around him, but they also noticed reviews often highlighted authenticity whenever he appeared. In an industry built on spectacle, he quietly edited reality back into fiction. Unlike many contemporaries, Duvall rarely attended award campaigns or publicity tours beyond obligation. He preferred ranches, horses, and small gatherings over premieres. Agents sometimes struggled persuading him to promote films, fearing studios would interpret absence as indifference. Yet directors who visited him described long conversations about human behavior, rather than cinema technique. He analyzed why people lied politely, why authority figures avoided eye contact, and how fear changes breathing before speech. Many of his performances reflected these details. Pauses lasting half a second longer than expected, reactions occurring before dialogue finished. Colleagues noticed he almost never watched playback monitors for vanity. Instead, he listened to sound levels and background noise. He believed truth in a scene often came from reaction rather than expression. In later interviews, younger actors described receiving handwritten letters after working with him. No advice about fame, only notes about observation. Watch how people sit when they feel unwelcome. Was a subtle absence, not just a recognizable face, but a silent corrective force inside scripts and rehearsals. The type of actor who didn't chase scenes, he stabilized them. Tributes describe a giant. Crew members describe something different. A calibrator of reality. And in a business powered by illusion, losing the person who kept it believable may be the loudest silence he ever created.
He is one of the most recognizable faces in the world, a man millions admire, yet very few truly understand. His name is associated with legendary films, quiet strength, and a rare kind of humility that feels almost out of place in Hollywood. But behind the fame lies a story that for years remained unspoken, a story marked by loss, silence, and a haunting question that followed him for decades. After everything, is hope still possible? Keanu Reeves has long been seen as different, not louder, not flashier, just real. That reality, however, was forged through pain, not peace. Long before the world embraced him as a global icon, his life was already shaped by instability. His childhood was fractured, his family life uncertain, and the sense that nothing truly lasts settled in early.
Or suits your purposes as a more mature artist. I had something happen in my real life, which was that I had
As his career began to rise, it seemed like life was finally offering balance. Success came fast, respect followed, and then love entered his life quietly, deeply, without spectacle. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe in something lasting, a future not defined by chaos, but by connection. Then, everything collapsed. A single tragedy would be enough to break most people. For him, it was only the beginning. Loss struck without mercy, ripping away the life he had imagined. Grief followed him like a shadow, heavy and unrelenting. Before the wounds could heal, fate delivered another blow, and then another.
Bought an antique tombstone in the year 2000, right when I finished graduate school, and I was driving from San Francisco to the East Coast. And on this road trip back east, I stopped in a small town in rural Wyoming where my aunt lived at the time, and she had a friend who ran an antique store, and we went in.
Each time, the silence around him grew thicker. Years passed. While Hollywood celebrated excess and romance, he walked alone. No public relationships, no glossy magazine covers, no declarations of love. Just a man moving through the world quietly, carrying weight few could see. Rumors spread. Some said he chose solitude. Others believed he had given up on love entirely, that some hearts, once broken deeply enough, never reopen. And for a long time, that seemed true. He focused on his work. He gave kindness where he could. He remained present but distant. The idea of happiness felt like something that belonged to another life, another version of himself that no longer existed. The world admired him, but assumed his story was already written. Then something changed. Not with a scandal, not with a shocking headline, but with a presence.
And she was looking at jewelry and all sorts of goofy stuff, and I couldn't take my eyes off this tombstone. Beautiful, in perfect shape. At that point, it was 120 years old. I purchased the stone, drove it back to the East Coast, lived there for a year, moved back to California, had it at home for a couple of years, and then I had it in the studio. And in 2000, I just really had
him naturally, without trying to redefine him or be defined by him. At first, people didn't know what they were seeing. The media hesitated, fans questioned it. This didn't fit the Hollywood template. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic reveals, just two people, older, wiser, both marked by loss, choosing to walk forward together. And that is what made it powerful. Because this wasn't a story about passion overpowering reason. It was about companionship after devastation, about choosing connection after believing it was gone forever. His quiet smile said more than any interview ever could. So who was she? How did their paths cross after so many years of isolation? And why did this moment, after so much pain, become a turning point not just in his life, but in how people saw him?
And I didn't know how to go about finding Stone's home, so I had the brilliant idea of listing it on eBay for way too much money, or a prohibitive amount of money, and just putting it at the corner of Main and First in terms of the internet, never dreaming that it would be found by an amateur genealogist who would then solve that it was from a homesteading cemetery not too far from here in Polk County.
For a long time, his past was spoken about only in fragments. Headlines avoided details, interviews moved quickly past the subject, and he himself never tried to correct the narrative. But behind the silence was a sequence of events so heavy that most people would never fully recover from them. At the end of the 1990s, when his career was reaching a new peak, his private life was quietly falling apart. He had found someone he trusted, someone with whom he imagined a future far away from cameras and premieres. Then, tragedy struck in the most brutal way possible. The child they were expecting was lost before ever entering the world. The pain was immediate, but the consequences were long-lasting. The relationship did not survive the grief. Just when it seemed nothing worse could happen, fate delivered another blow. Only months later, the woman he loved died suddenly in a car accident. No warning, no goodbye. One moment she existed, the next she was gone. For him, time froze. Life didn't explode into chaos, it simply went silent. Keanu Reeves never spoke publicly about the depth of that loss, but those close to him noticed the change.
It is the stone, the name, the story of a young baby who died in 1880. I had the choice. I could FedEx the stone back, or I could accompany it back and meet all the people who were directly connected to it. And I decided to do something that outside of the studio and that blurred the line between the personal and the professional. And the decision to bring a camera along.
He withdrew, not dramatically, not bitterly, just quietly. Work became a refuge, not a passion. Success no longer felt like a victory, it felt irrelevant. What followed was not a breakdown, but something colder, acceptance without healing. Years passed, and he carried the weight forward, never pretending it didn't exist. He was often seen alone, on park benches, subway rides, city streets. Photos circulated online, turning him into a symbol of sadness. People called him the loneliest man in Hollywood, without truly understanding what that loneliness contained. He didn't correct them. Instead of building walls of ego, he leaned into humility. He donated large portions of his earnings anonymously. He treated crew members as equals. He listened more than he spoke. And slowly, the world began to sense that this was not a man chasing happiness. This was a man learning how to live without it. Love, as far as anyone could tell, was no longer part of his story. Years turned into decades, new generations discovered his films, but the man behind them remained unchanged. No scandals, no marriages, no rebounds. The assumption became simple. Some losses closed doors forever.
Was to do it in a way that wouldn't change the nature of the encounters. I wanted to trace the series of exchanges, which for each participant had a slightly different impetus. But for me...
And then, quietly, something shifted. There was no announcement, no exclusive interview, just a few photos of him standing beside a woman, not posing, not performing. She looked comfortable. He looked lighter. Not euphoric, not reborn, just present in a way he hadn't been in years. At first, people dismissed it. A friend, a collaborator, anything but what it seemed, because the idea that someone so deeply marked by tragedy could open his heart again felt unrealistic, almost naive. But the signs kept appearing. Shared moments, subtle gestures, a calm intimacy that couldn't be staged. For the first time in a very long time, the question was no longer about what he had lost, but about what he might still be capable of finding. Their paths did not cross in a dramatic way. No red carpet collision, no viral moment, no sudden spark caught by flashing cameras.
About returning a stolen object, trying to understand the story of what the object really was, and also trying to understand why it had meant so much to me through capturing.
In fact, that is exactly why this story matters, because what happened between them grew slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, the opposite of how Hollywood relationships usually begin. Years before the public noticed anything, he was already familiar with her presence, not as a romantic interest, but as a creative mind, someone grounded, someone thoughtful, someone who did not orbit his fame, but stood firmly in her own world. Their connection began through work, through conversation, through ideas rather than attraction. Keanu Reeves was not looking for love. That part of his life had been closed for so long it felt sealed. The image, he also didn't display her to justify his happiness. He simply walked beside her. For someone who had spent years believing love might no longer be possible, that choice alone was revolutionary. But what truly made this relationship different wasn't how it began, it was what it represented. Not healing that erased the past, not happiness that denied pain, but something far more honest.
And in going through the archive, I really see that it's the story itself that continues to connect people. And whatever the project is at the end, it has already been successful because it keeps drawing people together.
When the relationship finally became visible to the public, the reaction was immediate and divided. Some people were surprised, others were confused, and many didn't know how to process what they were seeing because it didn't follow the familiar script they had been conditioned to expect. Keanu Reeves had always existed in a strange space within pop culture, admired, respected, even loved, but also mythologized. Over time, the public had turned his solitude into part of his identity. He wasn't just an actor anymore, he was a symbol of quiet suffering, of dignity through pain, and symbols are not supposed to change. So when he appeared beside her, openly, calmly, without explanation, it disrupted something deeper than gossip. It challenged the idea that his story was meant to remain frozen in loss. The internet reacted first. Photos spread rapidly. Comment sections exploded. Some praised the authenticity. Others criticized her looks, her age, her refusal to fit into the glossy fantasy expected of someone next to a Hollywood star. The cruelty was loud, and it revealed something uncomfortable. People were more invested in the image of his sadness than in his actual happiness.
And it's so rare that objects get returned to their communities. And at a very small level, we think of returning something, but we don't think about.
But he did not respond. No statements, no defenses, no corrections. He did what he had always done. He stayed quiet and continued living his life. And in that silence, something powerful happened. The narrative began to shift. Because the more people saw them together, the clearer it became that this was not a phase, not a PR move, not a reaction to loneliness. This was stability, and stability, unlike drama, doesn't shout. What stood out most was how normal it all looked. They attended events together, but without spectacle. They held hands, but not for cameras. They stood close, not to be seen, but because that's where they wanted to be. There was no attempt to sell a story, and that made it impossible to ignore. Slowly, admiration replaced skepticism. People began to understand that this relationship wasn't meant to inspire fantasy. It was meant to reflect reality, that love doesn't always arrive young, that healing doesn't require erasing the past, that companionship can exist without perfection. For many, especially those who had experienced loss themselves, this mattered deeply. His choice became a mirror, proof that life does not end at heartbreak, that connection can return in a different form, quieter, slower, but just as meaningful. And perhaps most importantly, he never positioned this relationship as redemption. He never framed it as finally happy. There were no grand declarations, just presence, just consistency, just showing up. That restraint made it honest, because the truth is, he didn't find someone who saved him, he found someone who walked beside him, someone who didn't compete with his past, but accepted it as part of who he was. And in a world obsessed with transformation, that kind of acceptance felt radical. But the real impact of this relationship went far beyond public opinion. It changed how he moved through the world, how he worked, how he related to time itself. The most important changes were not visible in photographs. They didn't show up in headlines or red carpet moments. They happened internally, in the way he related to time, to loss, and to himself. For years, his life had been structured around endurance. Survive the past, carry it forward, don't expect more. That mindset kept him grounded, but it also kept him closed. What this relationship introduced was not joy in the loud sense, but permission. Permission to imagine a future without feeling disloyal to the past. For someone who had lost so much, that was not a small shift. It was a profound one. Keanu Reeves had never tried to replace what he lost. He never spoke about moving on, because for him, loss wasn't something you leave behind. It becomes part of your structure. The difference now was that he no longer carried it alone. People close to him noticed subtle changes, not dramatic happiness, not reinvention, but ease. He laughed more freely, he lingered in conversations, he seemed less guarded, less braced for impact. The world no longer felt like something he had to endure in isolation. His work reflected that shift as well. He remained selective, but more open, more engaged. His performances carried a different weight, not darker, but deeper. There was patience in them, a sense of presence that comes from someone who no longer feels emotionally stranded. This wasn't about being fixed, it was about being accompanied. What made this connection so powerful was timing. It did not arrive when he was broken and searching. It arrived when he had already accepted a life without romantic fulfillment. That meant the bond was not built on need, but on choice, and choice creates equality. She did not become the center of his life, she became part of it. That distinction matters. For years, fans had projected meaning onto him, turning his grief into symbolism, his loneliness into legend. But now the meaning was his to define, and he defined it quietly by continuing to live the way he always had, just no longer alone. There was also something else at play: age, experience, the understanding that love does not have to consume everything to be real, that companionship can coexist with independence, that intimacy can be steady instead of explosive. This relationship did not demand transformation, it allowed continuity. And that may be why it resonated so deeply with people watching from the outside. It didn't sell hope as fantasy. It presented it as something earned, something that can arrive late, without fireworks, without erasing scars. He never claimed happiness as a destination. He simply allowed connection to exist again. For someone whose life had been defined by impermanence, that was revolutionary. And yet, even this wasn't the end of the story, because the deeper impact of this relationship was not what it gave him, but what it gave others watching. What happened next was unexpected. This was no longer just his story. It quietly became a story that belonged to